Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming today. I know we're hearing that there's a lot of traffic, and so we may have some people trickling in, but I think we should go ahead and get started. First of all, a quick introduction. My name is Joyce Petrella. I'm the president of the Charter Oak State College Foundation Board and the sponsor of tonight's event. You might recall that some of you may have attended either virtually or in person here in this beautiful facility the first session of the Shea lecture, and this is the second in the series. I encourage you, if you haven't seen the first one, to please get online and take a look at it because it was really exciting and we had a lot of great dialogue amongst the participants. So you're in store for some wonderful experience tonight as well. First of all, I want to give you a quick background as to who the State College Foundation is. We are actually the not-for-profit board that starts to build a lot of input and donations for the scholarships and contributions related to the school's growth and strategy. What we do is, as well as provide these types of scenarios where we can have the public join us in discourse around things that are important to our society today. As a matter of fact, we were really pleased because on the first session that we ran back in the fall, we were astounded by the amount of interest in this particular topic of civil discourse. You can imagine in today's environment how much is going on with what politically as well as sociologically. And this is a great forum for us to learn the skills that we need to be able to have civil discourse and to be productive around the conversations that we have. We want to have really candid conversations amongst one another, and at the end of the day, be able to bring back some skills that we can use to have conversations back at home or in our own communities. That's really important. That's really what we hope to do. A little introduction about Shea Lecture. We have been doing these Shea Lectures for decades. And again, this has been based on the endowment that was given to us by the first president of the college back in 1973. The college has been around for a long, long time. Tonight we're lucky to have our current president, Ed Klonowski, and thank you, and his wife, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Yvonne to make the introductions.
All right. Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing this evening? Great. Awesome. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to join us this evening. My name is Yvonne Alston. I am the Chief Culture Architect, CEO, and founder of Indelible Impressions Consulting. We are a business strategy, learning and development firm that has its roots in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We do capacity building work for nonprofits, for-profits, academic institutions, as well as federal government entities. I have the pleasure of leading a team of 6 across the United States, and we couldn't be happier as to our partnership with Charter Oak State College Foundation and having these very critical community conversations that really help to educate, to amplify the needs of such conversations, and to help us to be much more engaged as community members. So with that, I am thrilled to have the opportunity to sit down this evening with Connecticut's Secretary of State, Stephanie Thomas, to chat about a topic that is important to us all, and that is participation in our democracy. Some background on Secretary Thomas. She was sworn in as Connecticut's Secretary of State on January 4th, 2023, after an esteemed 30-year career advising and problem solving for nonprofit organizations, running her own business, and serving as state representative of the 143rd District, which includes Norwalk, Wilton, and Westport. Thus, Secretary Thomas brings a unique blend of business expertise and a passion for civics to public service. For those who may not know, she has led the implementation of significant election reforms right here in the state of Connecticut, including the rollout of early voting and a new centralized voter registration system. And in 2023, she secured a historic investment of a whopping $25 million to replace the state's aging infrastructure voting machines, and it is the first upgrade that we have had in the state of Connecticut since 2006. Can we get a round of applause for that? Not a small feat, to say the least. During her term, the Secretary plans to institute something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act of Connecticut, which is going to help automate much of our voter registrations at several Connecticut sites, okay? And this is what is going to enable us to ensure that all of us get the opportunity to rightfully participate in our democracy. So part of the reason that we're here, part of the reason that I'm having this conversation with the Secretary is that she believes in healthy representative democracy that relies on regular and active participation in civic life by all of us. To promote a robust civic engagement, she meets with communities just like she is tonight to hold these discussions, to help us to really cultivate nonpartisan dialogue between people and their government, of which she represents here this evening. So we couldn't be more honored by her presence to do just that. So would you please join me in welcoming to the Power of Us, Empowering Voices, Bridging Perspectives, Secretary of the State of Connecticut, Stephanie Thomas.
With an introduction like that, it's bound to be disappointing from her on.
Never, never. We're so honored to have you here this evening. Thank you for your time.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
It's been a great 2 years. So
Yeah.
This is what I love to do.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So we're going to jump right in if that's okay with you.
Yep.
All right. So what knowledge or skills do you believe are essential for truly effective civic engagement?
It's an excellent question, and you'll see me referencing some notes because I spend all my days talking to crowds, and then as soon as I leave, I say, I forgot to mention that one critical thing. And this is so important. It's always been important, but I think now it's even more important than ever. So I'm actually going to answer that question from the perspective of the day after the election. We spend a lot of time talking about getting out the vote, you know, making sure your vote counts, all of that. And I think there are a lot of people in that space. But there aren't as many people talking about what our responsibility is and what our obligations are as Americans to do beyond the vote. So voting usually answers the question, who is going to represent us, whether it's local, state, or federal government. And we spend a lot of time figuring out who best represents us, so we get to cast a ballot. But not everyone cares equally about every role out there. And it's really important, if we're talking about civic engagement, that we figure out who was responsible for what. And then, of course, it's where do we find all of the information we need to know? When are meetings happening? How do we get minutes from those meetings? Because we all have full-time jobs, most of us. And like, you might not be able to go to a town meeting, but we live in this incredible time of a thing called the internet and open government. So just about every governmental body has to take minutes, and those have to be posted, and we can go ahead and access that information so we're not out of the loop. And we need to think about how decisions are made. When I was a state representative, people would often come to me and say, like, I care about X issue. And it wasn't a committee I sat on, which means in the Connecticut state legislature, I have very little power to raise a bill or make sure a bill is called for a public hearing, etc. So like knowing how to navigate these bodies, like what's the committee structure, when do they meet, if you have an issue you want to get on the agenda, how do you do that? Or are you always just being reactive to what's already on the agenda? These are things we have to start, and I'm almost done, thinking about.
No, these are great tips. This is what we're here for, is to learn what the process is like and how we can engage in it.
Yeah, and also paying attention to when the public is invited to participate and then walking through those doors. One of the examples I give all the time, about 62% of voters voted that they would like early voting in Connecticut. Great. So there was a public hearing to discuss what Connecticut's early voting would look like. Is it 2 days? Is it 45 days? Is it tabulator? Is it an envelope? Is it 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. or is it 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.? All of these details, and about 65 people showed up to testify. But I promise you, a lot more people than that have had complaints since the law was passed.
I'm sure.
And, when the public has, we are a representative democracy, so there are, in just about every public body, a means set up for us, we the people, to engage with our elected leaders. But it's up to us to walk through those doors. And one thing I talk about a lot, again, when I was a legislator, I sat on 3 committees, but there are about 30 committees, so I can't be an expert in everything, nor can any elected person. So we really count on organizations, individuals, other agencies to provide us with the expertise that we need to make sound decisions. And I was always flabbergasted when something really important was happening, and I would be floundering, wondering, how do my constituents want me to vote on this thing? I assume they elected me because they think I make good decisions, but some issues are very complex, and it would have been helpful to hear from people who actually had lived experience or expertise. But a bill would come up, and if I received 2 emails, that's a lot. And even for what people are against, a big flurry of emails might be about 35. And then you're like, oh, I guess I better vote no on that. 35 people. And the truth is, most people may have wanted it, but we didn't hear about it. So it's really important that we get in the habit of remembering that we are the we and we the people whose voices do matter, and until we share them, I say we can't complain.
Yeah. That's very true, and I think most of the time, many of us think about our civic duty in terms of voting. Mm-hmm. We don't necessarily think about, well, if we're having particular personal challenges or certain community challenges, that we can tap into folks like our Secretary of State to say, this is what we're experiencing, this is what we're hearing, these are the challenges, so that you do get that community voice in there. I also think about the businesses in particular as well, right? I'm sure that when it comes to things that are business-oriented, taxes and things like that, I'm quite sure you hear from them versus...
Don't be so sure.
Really? Interesting.
There are areas that have lobbyists, some people hire lobbyists.
Sure.
And there are certainly entities like CBIA who represents business interests, or groups like that. But, having 1 meeting or 2 meetings with either a lobbyist or an entity is very different than receiving 1,000 emails from individuals who are impacted by the issue. It just, I always say every legislator is different, but we're all people. That's where we're similar, right? So basic psychology and human behavior doesn't go out the window just because we got elected. So if I hear from 100 high school students who would be impacted who want us to adopt a certain curriculum, that feels a little more accessible and like, oh, these high school students, than if I got a letter from the Association of High Schools. It's just a different feeling. Now, other people are different, so you have to kind of do everything.
Yeah.
But you'd be surprised. Very few people reach out and stop.
Okay. Well, this is good for us to know. So that's a call to action, is it not?
Yes.
So Stephanie wants to get an email from you, okay?
I don't, because I'm not a legislator. And all legislators, I'm looking at the camera. Sorry, but...
Well, Stephanie's inspiring us to communicate more frequently, perhaps. That's it. Thinking about that and thinking about those various tether points, where do you see the most untapped potential for community collaborations that could really result in meaningful and realized change?
It's an interesting phrase, community collaboration. So I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because I do think that's part of the problem. It might be an American problem. It might be a human problem. I'm not sure. But I always feel like there's this notion that there's somebody riding in on a horse. I am going to tell you exactly what to do and how to do it, and your problems will be solved. Abracadabra, kazoom, you know. But like, that's not how government works. Collaborations are great, and I think it's a way to move the ball down the field, since we're in playoff season, a little faster.
Very appropriate. There you go.
But I think about mass movements, like for ease, let's talk about the civil rights movement. There were collaborations and there was organization, right? But a lot of things often come first and happen alongside collaborations done by individuals. Whether it's someone who runs a business and they decide, I'm going to hire the first black person, absent a law, like they just decided for their own value system that they would do it. There are other people doing research in other countries. There are some people who are writers, writing op-eds. There are some people who are lawyers, fighting lawsuits. There are some individuals who just are filing lawsuits. And what I mean by this is there are a ton of individual activities that can add up to make a difference, and that usually starts the process of then figuring out who else is like-minded and how do you get together. So I like to push back on this narrative that we are not enough in our own mind, are smart enough, are knowledgeable enough to have an impact on government. We can all have an impact in the way that makes sense for us, and it happens in micro steps. So when I hear collaboration, I often feel like people are waiting for that group to point them in a direction and tell them what to do. When I talk to high school groups, I always say, like, spoiler alert, our form of government is not going to be the one easy thing in your life. Like, it's just not going to be. But nothing is. None of us were expert at our job the first day we got there. I hope our first date was very different than, like, later dates, our relationships. I joke, I've still been trying to get six-pack abs, and no matter how much I work out, it never happens. Like, it's hard, and government is hard. It's very siloed. It requires knowledge to impact it correctly or to actually have some agency. But like everything else, you don't have to learn it all at once. You can chip away at it. And I think that is the secret for success, long-term success. Yeah.
I appreciate the redirection on that, because I think you're correct. I think even as I was coming along as a young adult into my professional career, it was all about joining forces with others, and I can't say that I actually got messaging that I could be the force. And I think that's what you're speaking to, is this sense of empowerment that we all have, that we could truly, beyond the phraseology, right, of be the change you want to see, but that we truly can. We just have to put that intentionality behind it and the
Have to
effort.
believe it. And actually, you're reminding me of two things. One, that is a lot of what we've been trying to do with our Power of Civics website, and we put some information at the front table out there because a lot of people don't know where to get started. So Power of Civics is something we put together, a bit of a primer to get everyone started, regardless of age and what they know, to help them figure out how to navigate local, state, and federal legislative bodies. But one thing I do want to talk about regarding collaboration, I come from the nonprofit sector, and whenever you mention something about government, it got conflated with politics and, oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. We'll lose our 501c3. Whereas the law is a little more nuanced than that, and you can talk about government. But the same in the business community. I run a business. I can't talk about politics. And I just try to get people to divorce those two notions. When I'm running for office, I'm a politician. When I'm Secretary of the State, I'm in government. Regardless of how you feel about politics, people will be elected to serve in these roles. And you don't have to be engaged in politics to be engaged in governance.
Wow.
Like,
great
there
distinction
is room
there
for cross-sector collaborations, and I think there are communities that have been keeping government at arm's length to their own detriment because they are thinking it's politics.
I think that's an important distinction because while many of us took civics perhaps in high school, right? And
If we're lucky.
If we're lucky, and if you weren't a political science major in college, you're kind of divorced in a way from how it all works. And then you turn on the news and it just seems messy and difficult and controversial, which it does not always have to be, certainly.
That's really interesting. I've never actually thought about this in this way. A lot of people figure out when to get civically engaged because of the news. And it feels that way because the news only intersects government when it is messy. It's usually
correct.
Because one, it has to be worthy of a story, right? If everyone's in agreement, like it's not on the news. So it has to be something that they think has two very different points of view. It usually is right before like a big vote or some other cataclysmic type of activity. And it tends to be messy because like that's, people
that's what gets the Nielsen ratings
people
up.
Want clicks, right? So government is way more collaborative, much quieter, and this is why we try to lead people to the power of civics so they start thinking about government differently. By the time something is in the news, it is generally too late to enact a change. I'll use early voting as another example. The conversations about early voting in Connecticut were going strong by many different entities for 14 years. So by the time the constitutional amendment passed and the opening day of the legislative session, people already had like 14 years of ideas about how it should happen. Studies had been done. Like there were a lot of details already decided. And not like legally decided, but if someone's been spending 14 years thinking about an issue and then you see a news story and you show up like, I think it's a bad idea, and then you wonder, like, and then people wonder, like, they didn't listen to me. Like, maybe not, but like, we live in the real world. Like, it's hard to convince someone of a different idea if they've been living with it for a very long time. That is why it is very important that you take advantage of these opportunities to learn, sit in meetings, see what's being discussed, weighing in, etc. So government is slower and more plotting than the news media would lead us to believe.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thinking more about civic engagement, how would you define that in your own words? Because I think some people go to textbooks or, might Google that. I'm just curious from your own vantage point, what does civic engagement actually mean and look like?
It's a good question, and I should have like a rote answer by now.
You just be off the cuff. We're just talking.
For me, civic engagement is anything that is making your community better, whether you're defining your community as the local school system or your town or the country or your workplace. I'll stop there. Like, it's anything.
Yeah.
It's engagement.
Right. And I think oftentimes we put it in these boxes, which then is why we don't get sometimes the momentum and the movement that we're seeking, is because we don't recognize that volunteering is civic engagement, philanthropy is civic engagement, as much as writing your legislators is civic engagement, voting, all of these things are a part of that process.
100%.
And we have a responsibility to that.
I think we put these labels on, and I think this is why people feel they're not equipped to do whatever the it is. Like, I'm not equipped to do that. I mean, and by the way, a lot of people think they're not equipped to run for office, and that's a whole nother thing I won't even get into. But we can all run for office. Yeah. I wasn't a poli-sci major. I never thought I'd do it, and I'm not a lawyer. All things that people feel are like a prerequisite.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. What innovative approaches to civic engagement have you seen or would you like to see implemented so that we can truly advance the democratic participation? And I'm thinking probably bigger picture, not just here, Connecticut, but something more global.
I'm not sure I have seen it. And I'm constantly at odds with myself on whether or not it's a good idea.
Okay.
But right now, in this moment in time, in my adult life maybe, like, advertising is key, right? Like, Coca-Cola and Pepsi know that you have to get eyeballs on the product for people to buy it.
That's right.
When I talk to seniors about civic engagement and why they think it's so important, most of them had civics in school, so that's a big thing. But a lot of them talk about the war or the Depression being like a country-level unifying act that led them to know that they are part of this entity called the United States of America, and they think it's important to stay involved. I don't know, like, when I talk to 18 and 19-year-olds, they have no such unifying concept. So I just think that if there were like a chief civics cabinet position with billions of dollars, where every time you turned on the TV, much like we had Schoolhouse Rock, you're like, I know, it feels good to be an American, I'm gonna vote. Like, I just think we only talk about voting. We don't talk about the other 364 days. We don't talk about our obligations in a representative democracy or a constitutional democracy or a republic, whatever you want to call it. We kind of, and I hear this from people all the time, we kind of feel like it can exist and it like forever because it has existed in our lifetimes. But I mean, a lot of other great countries had many different systems before they landed on a final one. So to keep it, as Ben Franklin said, like we have to work at it. And absent civic education in schools, there is no universal delivery system to teach us what that means. So I would love to see that created. Closer to home and maybe less grandiose. I think just talking about it at whatever grassroots level we hold sway over as individuals. We started our CEO program, which stands for Civically Engaged Organizations, because we also run the business registry and we have access to a lot of business owners. So a lot of business owners are like, oh, hey, I'd love to teach my employees or customers when elections are coming, how to get engaged, how things work, how the town is organized. So we put out information to them and they share it. I think it is just going to take all of us doing more every day and divorcing these conversations away from elections. So I would love to see more of that. And I have to give a plug for Connecticut's Kid Governor program,
Yay.
which is a great program. It's now been replicated in other states. I forget, some state is just about to start it this year. But the sad news is, like, the kid governor got more votes than the mayor of Hartford. So, I mean, it's funny, but it's not funny.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
turnout is an issue.
Yeah.
But the difference is the kid governor program, like teachers are purposefully talking to every fifth grade class. And the same is not true with our election system. So back to a big advertisement.
Campaign, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the perfect segue into discussing, from your vantage point, why do you think that perhaps a disengagement is what it is?
I think it's lack of education. When I talk to people about disengagement, the answers are often different than we might think. When I talk to people about why they might not vote, I've been surprised how many people, mainly young people, but not all, have said to me, the process feels like it's too hard. And I say, like, oh, so you Googled and couldn't figure out where to go? And they're like, no, I didn't even attempt that because it just feels too hard. Advertisement would solve that.
Yes.
A lot of people also don't know where to start, where to go. Even if you had civics in school, it's usually organized around what I call like the foundational documents, like Constitution, Bill of Rights, what's it mean, how did America get started, etc. No one is teaching you in school, like, oh my gosh, my son is about to be school-aged, and I think he's on the spectrum, and I can't get my IEP. I don't know what an IEP is. Where do I go? Like, no one teaches you. This pothole shows up every winter in the same spot on my street, and I have ruined more tires than I care to name. Who do I call? Like, no one has taught anyone any of this. So the older we get, we experience these issues, and we don't think of government as our partner in these things. We usually pit ourselves against government.
Yeah.
But now that I'm in government, I realize how little feedback and input I get. So y'all are at fault. No, I mean, me too. Like, I never called my state representative until I became one.
But I think that's a good point. It's the ignorance, in a way, that keeps us from being more civically engaged. I know that we've got to wrap up our chat part to leave
can
time.
I say one more thing?
Please, yes.
I think
yes.
it's important. A lot of people get disengaged because they say, and we've all said it, nothing ever changes, it doesn't matter, blah, 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 blah. And like maybe that's true, but government moves slowly. But I give this example. Let's imagine 5 of us run for office. I want to do voting rights. You want to do maternal health. You want to do affordable housing, etc. We all get elected. Our constituents elected us because they believe in our core issues. We all show up in a building somewhere and find out there's a finite budget. So now all 5 of us have to fight for that thing that our voters elected us for. And when I show up with nobody in tow, no one's coming to testify, no one's sending letters, and someone else shows up with 300 people testifying, sending letters, making a fuss, like guess who gets those finite resources? We elected people need backup to make change happen. And like we, the people, are the backup. So that is why it is critically important to write to your representatives about stuff you like as much as about stuff you don't like. Because if you're showing up vying for these limited resources, and it's one thing to say, my constituents all want early voting. It's another thing to say, I got 1,000 letters last week. Here they are, boom,
Right.
wanting early voting. Again, we're all humans. Like, it's all human. So that's like a small example. Of course, it's not that simple, but it's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. So my one last question for you, and this is something that in having discussions with your team, which are fabulous, something that's very important to me is when we start talking about the intersections of like the, health and the well-being of individuals when it comes to civic engagement and how that shows up and the impact both on individuals in the community. I know that this is something that your team is starting to undertake and get a little bit deeper on that. Would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Sure. Let me think how to frame it. Like nothing exists in a silo. It's interesting. I've been a Black person my entire life. And
Me too.
I know, funny how that happens. But it's funny, until I ran for office and started, because like most normal people don't walk around talking to crowds all the time about themselves. And when I was first running for office, a lot of things came up. It was very emotional, and it shocked me a little bit. And it made me think about this differently. If you feel that you are not seen, or that government actually doesn't care about you, or that you've tried and, across generations things have not been resolved, how does that make you feel from a mental health perspective, not just about government, but about your own potential outcomes, your life chances? So I think a lot of people are starting to look at intersectionality a little more, especially since there's such a mental health crisis in this country.
Correct.
And we're hoping to put together a civic health index that would measure some of this and give us concrete data, and then hopefully programs and funding that follow. So it's new, and it's like, who knows where it will go, but I do believe it's all connected.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. And we actually developed a piece that's on all of your tables there that actually talks a little bit about this and pulls some great data from the National Institutes of Health and some other resources so that we can start to begin, even this evening, thinking about this and how we can positively impact the work. And I'm going to bring that word back around to collaborate with the Secretary of State and her office to help to raise more awareness, right? And for someone who does work in culture, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, I loathe getting stuck in awareness. Awareness is where it's at, but we have to talk about action and accountability if we're going to move the needle on anything. And so I think the same in this respect as well. But I think tonight is a great starting point for many of us to learn more, have conversations, and hopefully start participating a little bit more as it relates to our civic participation. So with that, we did have a couple of questions that kind of came forward, but we do want the opportunity to give you all a chance to ask questions. We do have Joyce Petrella here, who is the president of the foundation. If you just flag your hand, you can ask the secretary a question.
Hello.
Hello, and Madam Secretary, thank you for all that you do for us, and as a small business owner, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
But my question specifically is, does the state, we're a democratic state, let's face it, have a plan to work with the new federal admin coming about next week?
Obviously, I can't speak for the governor or the rest of the state. I, like most of you, I think I saw a newspaper article that Governor Lamont would be attending the inauguration. Every statewide official obviously works with the federal government in different ways. In the secretary's office, it's mainly been around FinCEN in the Corporate Transparency Act. And then, of course, we do receive here in Connecticut some funding through the Help America Vote Act, and there has been some conversations about restricting or cutting that funding. So that's something, you know, I'm already assuming I'll have to reach out to our congressional delegation. I'm an individual, right, constituent, so I will reach out to them to make sure that we try to protect many of the voting rights actions that we have here in Connecticut, as well as the funding. But, you know, so much of the work of government, like I said, is kind of behind closed doors, more like conversation and collaboration. So no state is in a position to cut out the federal government, right?
Thank you for that. We have another question.
Hi, I'm Mary McAllister, and I'm also on the board of the Charter Oak State Foundation. I heard you mention a civil index, which is very exciting. Any thoughts about connecting that to the social determinants of health?
Yeah, so we are looking at that. And by the way, there's no funding for a civic health index, so all partners are welcome to chip in. We have been talking to various entities who might, in fact, chip in so that we can put the civic health index together. And that Connecticut has done these several in the past, but the last one was 2016. And so thoughts about some of this was different. So we are looking at all of those sort of cross-pollination. I'm not explaining myself well, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So we are looking at that, and we would welcome Charter Oak as a partner.
Hint, hint. All right, I think we have...
I used to be a nonprofit fundraiser, so... Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ted Pizzo, and first of all, I want to thank you for your service. I appreciate your investment of all your personal time. My question is there a way, I heard you say we can get involved by writing letters to our congressmen and women. If we already have a platform, is there some way that we can get the word out in terms of bringing people together that is politically agnostic in these kinds of formats?
If I understand the question correctly, yeah, I think anybody can reach out to any audience they have and talk about these things in a way that is wholly nonpartisan, right? There are two types of engagement. Like there's advocacy, which is advocating a certain position, which may or may not be partisan, right? But getting involved, giving people the information they need to weigh in one way or another is nonpartisan, and I think we'd be doing each other a service to help teach people how to do that. Again, a lot of people just react if they're against something, but it is important to react when you're for something. One example I'll give, we were talking about something earlier. Sorry, I have 3 thoughts running in my mind. Let me try to get one of them out. When you are engaged as part of your everyday life and weighing in on things as you hear about them, it's more likely that whomever is elected will listen to you if they know you, right? And you are likely to not have so much pent-up anger that forces some people to communicate in a way that is not helpful, right?
Yeah.
So if you are the person who's like calling your elected and say, oh, I saw that the committee was discussing this issue. I'm confused. Are you trying to do X, Y, or Z? And like, let them answer. And then the next month, when you see at the next meeting, it's slightly different, you can then call them back and say, oh, I thought you were doing Z. Tell me how we got to X. Or like, in my experience as X, Y, and Z, this is what I think is helpful, not helpful. But having those conversations on an ongoing basis means that when something confusing comes up, that legislator might pick up the phone and call you because they know you know a lot about it, you've been following it, etc. I forget how I started there, but so we just have to think about all of this more than once a year and try to just fit in where we can. We're all busy, but we have to make time. Like, I watch Squid Games, so if I did that, I can call my congressional representative. Like, I have time, right?
Yeah. This season is phenomenal, I'm just going to say for the record.
I fell asleep during the second episode, so I didn't go back and watch it, but I clearly missed something.
Well, what I will also say to Mr. Pizzo's comment, and I happen to know him personally, is I think what you're getting to, the heart of it is relationship building, right? And sometimes we take so much time to build personal relationships, we take time to build our business networks, but we don't necessarily take time to build our governmental or political relationships, right? So that we can be part of informing the government, right? That and the society that we are a part of. And I think that that's a necessary element that sometimes it seems like it's just a simple thing and it's a fact, but we miss it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I love
that.
Good. I'm going to steal it.
Well, we're friends now, so, friends borrow things.
Yes.
Any other, we have another question in the audience.
Yes. Hi, thank you. Al Smith. All the polls and all the research shows that the voters' trust in institution is the lowest maybe it's ever been in this country. At the bottom is politics, government. Not much higher is the media. That's not healthy. That's concerning for a democracy. Why do you think that is the way it is? What's caused that? And what is causing it? How do we reverse that?
Politics is awful. I mean, honestly, it is. And there's so many interrelated things, like the shrinking of local media. Most people are looking at national media. I remember there was a young lady voting for the first time in Wilton, and she was like, how long should I set aside? This was last year, before early voting even. And she was like, 4 hours? And I laughed. And she goes, longer? And I'm like, no, but she has seen so much news coverage about long lines at polls. I'm like, in Wilton, probably like 4 minutes, like you'll be set. But, I mean, they have a great team. But, so I think, again, the news is covering messy stuff. So if two candidates are friendly, running a great campaign, never saying a harsh word, no one's going to know about that. So when we hear all these stories, people take that in and they don't have another experience to compare it to. They see attack ad after attack ad, so they're like, politicians always attack each other. They see like the Santos story, oh, politicians always lie about their credentials. And that's why I think if we were all more involved on an ongoing basis, you start to realize the truth of the matter. And the truth, in my opinion, is that humans are the same regardless of industry. So the same way in kindergarten, there were some people who pushed you down, some people who were afraid to talk, some people who just had joy. Those same people exist, but like now they're politicians. And like people don't change, right? I mean, they do, but so we can't expect every single politician to be one thing or another thing, because they still are represented in the same numbers as in any other field. So I just think we have to do more to get more involved, to understand who people are, regardless of the label of politician.
Agreed.
But it is concerning, and that's why I do stuff like this and have these talks, because we can't just rely on like one civics class and then we never think about this again from the age 18 upward.
Yeah. All right, we have a microphone here, and we have one more question to the right after.
Yes, and to piggyback off his question, I have two questions. One, when you see all the bashing in politics, I like to say it, right, do the candidates behind the scenes are friends and getting along, or is this just like a public show where they're just mudslinging in the media, but behind closed doors, they're really friends, if you will? That's my first question. And the second question.
Let me answer that because I won't be able. I don't know, right? Everyone is different. What I would say is if someone's bashing me, it's probably not likely that I'm friendly with them. I might be polite, but that is different, right? So some bashes are real and some might just be spectacle. It depends on the person.
And also, you had mentioned, like, if you get a pothole or if your kid is on the spectrum, IEP, where do you go? Who do you talk to?
I'm the Secretary of the State, and neither of those are my areas of expertise. I actually don't know, but that's where the research comes in, right? There's going to be a local department in your town dealing with potholes, so it might be Department of Public Works, but
Yeah.
it might be something else, but calling your town, and like, let's not forget that Connecticut is made up of 169 towns, many of whom have different forms of government. So how it's done in your town might be very different. I have a council system, so I would probably go there because there would be a committee in charge of some of that policy and maybe money, right? But in another town, it might be your board of selectmen. In another town, it might be your alders. Like if you're trying to get more money allocated or something, I don't know. And the education piece, it's usually going to be your school board would be your first. But that is something that happens all the time. First of all, no one knows what the Secretary of the State does. So let me tell you, we run the business registry, which means if you're trying to form a business entity, a nonprofit, et cetera, you're going through our office. But the legislature writes the laws around what that looks like, what licenses are required, what the fees are, et cetera. So we're kind of ministerial. Think of us as a file cabinet. And we oversee the administration of elections, which most people misunderstand. Every town in Connecticut has registrars of voters who are duly elected officials who run the elections in their town. They don't report to us or work for us, but we have to make sure they are following whatever laws the federal government and state government have put out with respect to most elections, not all. Anything outside of those topic areas I might know, but I'm not paid to know.
Got it. And we have time for one last question here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for your time this evening. I'm sure we all appreciate it very much. My concern is the civic engagement during the next 4 years, and I just wanted your personal prediction or take on this. What my thought is that there are going to be a lot of outraged people, and I am wondering if that outrage, as you see it, will translate into further disenfranchisement and throwing up of hands or violent responses or further civic engagement. That's
You know, it's a good question. I wish I had a crystal ball, although I might apply it to Mega Millions and not this question. I don't know, right? But I do think that all like whether it goes toward violence or civic engagement or more people running for office does depend on all of us. Like, we are those people. I just don't know. I hope it goes toward more engagement, but I have not found that to be the case in my lifetime of other, for some people this will be a hard time, but for some people this will be an incredibly joyous time. But I have just found there tends to be, despite cocktail party chatter, a big step back, no matter which side you're on, and a temptation to only do what comes across your path instead of seeking it out, and what might be considered, I would say in modern day, I would call it easy, right? When I think of other big movements in our history, I mean, people died for women to have the right to vote, for civil rights, for gay rights. We are not at that point. Like, people are like, well, like I couldn't post twice today on Instagram. Like, that's a hardship. So I don't know. Like, will it move people? I have no idea. But I hope that regardless of the time we find ourselves in, we still have to be involved, because there will be something in our individual lives, something that we care about, that government is deciding. And my last statement I'll say, the tentacles of government are very long. Once a policy is set, it could impact generations to come. So it's really important that we remember that, right? And we all treat it with the amount of importance that it has on our everyday life.
I couldn't agree more. And I will close out today's discussion with a quote from one of my favorite, I should say, activists and professors, Eddie Glaude, who says, "We have to take responsibility for our democracy, and it is ours to do." So with that, I want to thank you, Secretary Thomas, for joining me today.
Thank
This
you.
discussion. We get a round of applause for her.
And for Yvonne.
Thank you. This was a delightful conversation.